Taha Foundation Community Center, a 48,000 square foot facility that has the amenities we need to improve and expand our programs, including a lecture hall, classrooms, a gym, and a spacious outdoor gathering area. While we are able to secure the purchase of this building, a lot of work is still required to transform it into the state-of-the-art facility that serves our needs in the most effective and efficient way possible. Today, more than ever, and for the sake of our kids and families, we're asking for your support in raising the funds needed for this project. Our fundraising target is $580,000 that will go towards renovations, repairs, furniture, and equipment. Your contribution, no matter how small, will make a significant difference. Join us as we embark on the next stage of our journey. With Allah's guidance and your support, we can empower the next generation of leaders and build a better future for our youth. Donate today. "10 years ago, we embarked on a mission to revive the true values of Islam within our community. Empowered by the faith and dedication of our volunteers and your endless support, our projects impacted the lives of tens of thousands in our community and beyond. Since day one, our effort was recognized as one being led by the youth, and the youth have always been at the center of our focus. Our goal was and remains to instill Islamic values that enlighten the young generation, strengthen their identity, and empower them to become successful leaders in the future. But as the times we are in become more challenging every day, and our values are consistently under attack, we cannot stand still, and having a facility that allows for bigger and better projects became a necessity. Alhamdulillah, today, Taha Foundation, the parent organization of the Ashura project, and Al-Mustafa Scouts is pleased, honored, and excited to announce the next milestone in our journey. As of May 5th, we have completed the purchase of the upcoming Taha Foundation Community Center, a 48,000 square foot facility that has the amenities we need to improve and expand our programs, including a lecture hall, classrooms, a gym, and a spacious outdoor gathering area. While we are able to secure the purchase of this building, a lot of work is still required to transform it into the state-of-the-art facility that serves our needs in the most effective and efficient way possible. Today, more than ever, and for the sake of our kids and families, we're asking for your support in raising the funds needed for this project. Our fundraising target is $580,000 that will go towards renovations, repairs, furniture, and equipment. Your contribution, no matter how small, will make a significant difference. Join us as we embark on the next stage of our journey. With Allah's guidance and your support, we can empower the next generation of leaders and build a better future for our youth. Donate today.
كن حسيني الولاء والثبات، عش حسيني الحياة للممات، كربلائي كربلائي، كن رفيقي كربلائي. كن حسيني الولاء والثبات، عش حسيني الحياة للممات، كربلائي كربلائي، كن رفيقي كربلائي. كربلائي كربلائي، كن رفيقي كربلائي. بي حكاية الولاء من فلات كربلاء، علمت شبابها كيف تحفظ الصلاة، علمت عن أولياء، عن شباب أوفياء، أرخصوا مهر الدماء واشتروا عرض السماء، بالدماء وقعوا على الوصية، مهرهم رضا الأمير والزكية، يدخلون للجنان آمنين، كوثرا يسقيهم الولي ريا، بالدماء وقعوا على الوصية، مهرهم رضا الأمير والزكية، يدخلون للجنان آمنين، كوثرا يسقيهم الولي ريا. في العلاء في العلاء، كن رفيقي كربلائي. في العلاء في العلاء، كن رفيقي كربلائي. كن حسيني الولاء والثبات، عش حسيني الحياة للممات، كربلائي كربلائي، كن رفيقي كربلائي. كربلائي كربلائي، كن رفيقي كربلائي. كن كقاسم البطل، لا تمن بالأمل، فالفناء في الحسن أشهى من طعم العسل.
أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة وهو خصيم مبين. وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل شيء عليم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم. إنما إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون. إنما إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون. فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء. فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون. الله أكبر ولله الحمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر ولله الحمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. القارعة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. القارعة. ما القارعة وما أدراك ما القارعة. يوم يكون الناس كالفراش المبثوث وتكون الجبال كالعهن المنفوش صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات.
على حب فاطمة الزهراء صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
ثالثة لتعجيل الفرج صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. Our respected scholar, Sheikh Mahdi Rastani, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We would like to welcome you all to the 8th night of the Ashura Project English program. As the dear audience is already aware, since Sheikh Mahdi already posted the topics ahead of time, this is just to reiterate that today's topic may not be suitable for the younger audience. Please recite a salawat. Peace and blessings be upon Hussein and Ali, the son of Hussein, and the children of Hussein, and the companions of Hussein. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept all your deeds and hasten the reappearance of the Imam of our time, Ajalallah ta'ala Farajahu Sharif. Please help me welcome Sheikh Mahdi Rastani with 3 loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
One more loud salawat, please. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الهمم ولا يناله غوص الفطن
الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا وقت معدود ولا أجل ممدود أما بعد فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وإذا قيل لهم تعالوا إلى ما أنزل الله وإلى الرسول قالوا حسبنا ما وجدنا عليه آباءنا أولو كان آباؤهم لا يعلمون شيئا ولا يهتدون يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا يضركم من ضل إذا اهتديتم عليكم أنفسكم لا يضركم من ضل إذا اهتديتم إلى الله مرجعكم جميعا فينبئكم بما كنتم تعملون صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات اللهم صل على محمد. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, a second loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. The topic that we'll be discussing tonight, inshallah, is studying the Muslim response to changing sexual norms within society. The MC pointed this out. I'll just reiterate this before we get into this topic, that of course the terminology that we'll be using in today's talk may not be suitable for some of the younger audience amongst us. If you're younger, maybe you can find your mother, you can find your father, and inshallah they can decide if this is suitable for you or not. A couple points before we get into today's discussion. The first and most important point that one needs to keep in mind as we get into this discussion, as we discuss many of the nuanced and detailed points that we will discuss today, is that beyond the shadow of a doubt, adopting such lifestyles where someone is drawn to a person of the same gender and is acting upon this attraction is beyond the shadow of a doubt forbidden in Islam. I make this point clear from the very onset and from the very beginning because in today's talk we will discuss a lot of detailed, delicate points. There's quite a bit of nuanced discussions that we're going to have. And in the midst of our discussions, I don't want this point to get lost. Many times you will find when people try to make a nuanced point with regards to this topic, sometimes they are later accused that they may not believe that this is something that is forbidden in our faith and so on and so forth. Therefore, the first point that we have to make clear is that from the perspective of our faith, acting upon such desires is considered forbidden. If at any point within this talk in the next 45 minutes, there is a point that you hear and that you assume that the speaker is even implying anything other than this, then you have misunderstood the point that we were making. This is at the first level. At the second level, and this is just to be on the cautious side, if at any point in this discussion, your understanding or your interpretation in some absurd way is that we are asking for you to go above and beyond the laws of where you live, whichever country you might live in, whichever state you might live in. With regards to this issue or any other issue, then again, you have misunderstood the points that we are making in this talk. We are Muslims, and as part of our Islamic faith, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects us, and the rulings of our maraja expects from us to abide by the laws whichever country we might be living in. This is at a second level. At a third level, there is also a disclaimer to make that today's content and today's discussion is mainly addressed towards a person who has two main qualifications. The first of these qualifications is that this person fundamentally looks at this issue or wants to understand the issue from the Islamic perspective, meaning that this person either attributes himself to Islam or at least wants to understand how Islam views this issue. Therefore, if there are people out there who are not Muslim or they're not interested in understanding the Islamic take on this issue, this talk is not for them, it's not addressing them, and it would not be relevant to them either. That is the first qualification. The second qualification is that even if someone is Muslim, but for whatever reason, from their own perspective, have decided not to practice their faith in their day-to-day life. They don't wake up every morning with the concern of, am I practicing Islam every day in my day-to-day life? Again, today's talk may not be so relevant to them. We are approaching this issue from the angle of someone who wants to understand, number one, what is Islam's take on this issue? And furthermore, how can I implement that in my day-to-day life? If I don't fall under either of those categories, or both of them, I should say, well, then this talk may not be so relevant for this audience. Having said that, let us take a trip down memory lane a little bit. When we were younger and we were growing up, of course, we remember the idea of individuals who were drawn to the same gender. Now, at that time, maybe you might have heard the abbreviation of LGBTQIA+, or not. That's a separate discussion. But growing up, sometimes you would see characters in movies, in TV shows, other places you were exposed to these ideas. However, somehow, someway along the road, in the past 10 to 15 years, maybe 20 years, it seems as though the discussion and the discourse on this topic started to change a little bit in its nature. And there were a number of elements within it that started to change. It was no longer the same way it used to be when you were younger. Yes, when you were younger, sometimes you would come across a character, maybe it would create a question in your mind, but you would just assume that this is a person who's decided to live his life in a different way than maybe, for example, your loved ones were living their lives. If your loved ones, you saw your mother and father in a heterosexual relationship, in a relationship where there's a man and a woman involved, then you might see some character in some movie or TV show where that is not the case for them. However, you started to see the discourse and the elements in this discussion started to fundamentally change. What were some of the fundamental changes that have happened over the past 2 or so decades? Firstly, you started to see that these characters that before you started to run into every now and then, once in a blue moon, all of a sudden, the shows, the TV shows, whatever the case might be, there is always a character who's adopted such lifestyles in almost every single show. So now wherever you go, whatever episode of any show you watch, yes, whatever it is that you might be streaming, the reality is left and right, even more so than what the statistics tell us of the number of people who identify as part of these lifestyles. This was the first major difference that you would start to recognize. Sometimes you might be watching a movie, sometimes you might be watching a TV show, and the theme and the plot doesn't even necessarily coincide with these types of relationships. Yet, you would find a character in there, much more so today compared to before, who abides and adopted such a lifestyle. This is one switch and change that you found. The level of representation in media, of course, has doubled, tripled, and if you run the numbers will probably be a lot higher than that, in fact. This was one main difference of elements in this discourse. The second one that you also found was back in the day when we were younger, the idea was revolving around the basic human rights of someone who adopts this lifestyle. Individuals who adopted this lifestyle, they were more vulnerable, as the statistics tell us, sometimes in school, sometimes as adults. And therefore, the discourse was around the idea that the basic human rights of this person should be respected. If this person is growing up in school, they should not be harassed, they should not be bullied, they should be respected for whatever lifestyle they choose in their private life. This somehow evolved over time and turned into a discussion of not only respecting basic human rights, rather celebration, promotion, and showing that you are in love with this lifestyle. If someone came to you and shared with you that this is the lifestyle that they have adopted in their lives, if you were anything less than 110% delighted, now all of a sudden this is an issue. This was another thing that changed from the time when we were growing up. A third point of this discussion that also changed is back in the day, this used to be a private matter. If you didn't agree with the perspective that was, prominent within society and prevalent, you weren't necessarily a bad person. You were just a person who disagrees on this matter. At the end of the day, your opinion didn't matter so much because this person was practicing things in their own personal life. They weren't trying to get into your business. You weren't trying to get into their business. It was a simple private matter, personal matter. If you like it or you don't like it, your opinion carried no weight or any value. Fast forward to a couple decades later, all of a sudden, if you don't agree with this and you're not delighted and you're not celebrating and you're not promoting this, now all of a sudden you are given the titles and tags of being hateful, of being a person who is angry and frustrated and responding with such emotions. This wasn't the case when we were growing up. The fourth of these discussions that changed, the discourse that changed, is that when you were growing up, this was a matter that was discussed by the adults in society. Adults would come together because it's a discussion that naturally involves, at some level, an intellectual maturity to even understand some of these issues. And beyond that, a certain level of sexual maturity, because this is what the discussion is really about. You would find adults discussing this issue. That was how things were done. It wasn't necessarily a matter of getting anyone else involved. Fast forward a couple decades, all of a sudden, a child is expected to not only get involved in such discussions, but to make the biggest decisions of their lives in the early years of childhood. This was not the case when we were growing up. This was a discussion, and essentially should be a discussion, that adults might engage in. Someone might agree with it, someone might disagree with it. Again, your opinion and my opinion doesn't matter much in the private life of another person. Everyone gets to live life however they like, but that is no longer the situation today. The situation today is that children are brought into the discussion, and children are exposed to such ideas, and children are expected, though they have a simplicity to their minds and an innocence to their minds, they are expected to make decisions and give opinions on these issues that require intellectual and sexual and physical maturity. And the last element that changed within the last 2 decades was the way you found before advocates for this cause were individuals who cared for a person who adopted this lifestyle, for the basic rights of a person who adopted this lifestyle. And today you see it's no longer a matter of individuals. Some of the greatest corporations that you come across are now heavily invested and involved in the promotion and celebration. This was also something you weren't used to 10, 15, 20 years ago. Now, beyond all of this, one might ask, why are we taking time on the 8th or 7th night of Muharram to discuss a topic like this? One might say this is not something that involves us. This is something to be discussed at another time. Brothers and sisters, though you could have said that 10, 15 years ago, today you can no longer say that. That is not the reality of the matter today. Today, the reality of the matter is that this is an issue that involves our communities in a multitude of different ways. Whether it is the children we are talking about, whether it's not even necessarily children and from the angle of a parent, but simply from the angle of a person who has this question in his or her mind, that how is it and why is it that Islam does not approve of such a lifestyle when this person who is engaging in such behavior is not necessarily hurting anyone, is not necessarily being a bad citizen in society. These are fundamental questions that a lot of our younger generation will pose. And without answering them, the questions will not remain here. They will go further to asking themselves, is Islam truly the faith that can answer my needs in the 21st century? Today, inshallah, therefore, we'll take some time to delve into this topic by posing the following questions. Number one, did the Ahlul Bayt simply reject ideas that they found in society? Or did they take the time to shed light and remove any confusion with regards to those issues before taking a stance? Number two, what did Imam al-Hussein say on the 10th of Muharram to make sure that everyone who had come to the battlefield knew exactly what they were doing and exactly who they were going up against before he went to the tents and prepared to defend himself and his family? Number three, what do the statistics tell us about how the Muslim community as a whole has responded to these changing sexual norms in society? Number four, what are the 4 approaches that we found within the Muslim community, and which one of them is closer to the Islamic approach when it comes to this issue? Number 5, what was the problem with the people of Lut? Was the problem that the Quran had with them the lack of consent that they have in such relationships? Or was the problem something else? And how do we attribute such a thing to the verses of the Quran? And number 6, and finally, what should one do if somebody or someone you might know is struggling with attractions of this sort? Tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into these 6 questions with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allow us to begin from here, brothers and sisters. When you look in the seerah of the Ahlul Bayt, you don't find them to be individuals who simply rejected ideas left and right before first taking the time to clarify what the issue was and to clarify what their stance was with regards to that issue. Some of us have this understanding that when you have the truth with you, if you are a prophet or an imam, because naturally whatever you do or decide is the right decision, you're ma'soom at this point. Our understanding of the Ahlul Bayt was that these were individuals who wouldn't take time necessarily to explain to society why they have the stances that they have. Rather, they would look at a group of people and dismiss them. Rather, they would look at a certain idea and reject it, and that's it, and they would move on. We are the prophets and we are the imams, deal with it. This is the ruling, you deal with it. And as we will discuss, you will find many Muslims today also take this same approach with regards to this issue, as well as a lot of other issues as well. Instead of framing the Islamic response within its proper context, they will take 1 or 2 pieces of Islamic knowledge that are true, by the way, but they will only stick to 1 or 2 of those pieces of knowledge. You don't find this in the seerah of our beloved prophets. Even when the Prophet had this moment that was similar to a duel, you can say even, that we refer to as mubahala, where this side was going to pray against that side was going to pray against this side. Many of us are not aware that this is not how this interaction began with the Christians of Najran. When the Christians of Najran came to the Prophet, it was not the Prophet's first move to say, okay, you stand on that side, I'm going to stand on this side, let's pray against each other and see what happens. This was not the first approach of the Prophet. In fact, when they entered into the masjid of the Prophet allowed them to pray based on their own religion. They didn't know, they didn't ask for permission. Maybe it wasn't the best thing to do. The Prophet told his companions to be patient with them. After they were done, the Prophet engaged in conversation with them. The Prophet had arguments to make. He had points to clarify. When he turned to them and he said, you all need to follow Islam, they said, no, we already follow the faith that God wants us to follow. The Prophet responded to them and he said, how can you believe that Jesus is the Son of God and he is God at the same time and he is divine at the same time? And the conversation continued. The Prophet said, isn't it true that a father and a son should have some similarities in their essence and in their nature? They said, of course. He said, okay, well, is it the case that the God that we know of used to eat and drink? Recite another salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Does your God eat and drink? They said, no. He said, did Jesus used to eat and drink? They said, yes. Does your God end up in a womb? No. Was Jesus at one point in a womb? No. And the conversation continued. Yes. After it came to a point where they were told that things are different. Another salawat, please. No worries. Thank you. When the discussion reached a point where the Prophet knew that these people are simply trying to move away from the truth. At this point, the Prophet turned towards them and the idea of mubahala came into the picture. Similarly, you find Imam al-Hussein on the 10th of Muharram, he didn't go and, in the first moment start to prepare his sword and get ready for battle. The first approach that the Imam took on multiple occasions, not just in Karbala, on his way to Karbala as well, was to clarify for the people who were standing in front of him of who he is. And he has a longer khutbah on that day, but at one point he comes to this point. He says, listen, if you don't believe anything about me and anything that I say, there's just one thing that you cannot deny. Alastu ibnu bint nabiyyikum? Am I not the son of the daughter of your prophet? Is it not true that the prophet told you to be considerate of his family? This one you can't deny. Maybe you can say Hussein has gone and done this and gone and done that, but at the end of the day, the prophet ordered to be considerate of his family at the very least. They said, we understand, but we will insist. And when it came to this point, then the Imam recited a verse, quoting the verses of the Quran, that now I have made things clear between you and I. Now whatever you decide, that is on you and that is your decision. Therefore, this is the seerah of the Ahlul Bayt. Let us get into the particular topic that we are discussing. This is extremely important because when you look at the polls that have been done over the years, you only find that as the years go by, the Muslim response and Muslim acceptance of such lifestyles only starts to increase in numbers. Now, when someone says, I am accepting of such a lifestyle, does this mean that I am only accepting of it on a social level? If someone else is doing it, it doesn't bother me. Or does it mean that this person is accepting of this in terms of his or her own faith? This is something that might be difficult to tell based off of these polls, because the polls are usually simple questions, yes, no questions, and that's it. Nonetheless, one thing is for sure, that the general acceptance towards this, even within the Muslim community, is growing. There is no doubt about this. When you look amongst the Muslim community, you find there are three main approaches to this issue that we need to study. And then a fourth approach that seems to be closer to what Islam actually expects from us. The first of these approaches is an approach of complete denial. What are we even talking about? It's not even an issue. No, it's affecting our community. No, what do you mean? Sheikh, this stuff is for the people, they are sinners, the ones who have nothing to do with us, the one who he has taken a different path in his life, he's not part of us, he's this, he's that. This is for them. Muslims don't deal with these issues. This is the first path. And growing up, there might have been individuals, organizations, whatever the case might have been, who sometimes even with good intentions might have taken this approach. But in the world that we live in today, this approach is nearly impossible. Still, you will find organizations who will act as if these issues are not issues for the youth of today. And they will act like these issues are not affecting our community. And they will act like these questions are not pressing questions. Sheikh, just ignore it, and in a couple years, it'll all be gone and pass. And no, this is not the world that we live in anymore. The first approach is the approach of denial. This is that same person that if you come to him and you say, well, I'm dealing with depression, this person will tell you, depression is for someone who is ungrateful in his life, someone whose spirituality is weak, and so on and so forth. You're not like that. Don't talk about this stuff. Move on. This approach of denial, brothers and sisters, doesn't work for us. Now, whether it's right or wrong, either way, it doesn't work in today's world. This is the first approach. I will move a little bit faster because if we are discussing this topic, naturally, we're not taking this approach to begin with. The second approach that you will find is an approach of complete acceptance. Meaning, when this issue is brought up, this person looks at himself, looks at the religion of Islam, looks at sometimes, and we're going to get into this, why is it that someone would feel compelled to be accepting of such lifestyles in this faith? We're going to talk about that momentarily. This person looks at himself, looks at the religion of Islam, looks at the difficulty that this person is going through experiencing such attractions, which I will touch on, and says, well, what's the problem? Allow us to be accepting of this. Wouldn't that solve everything? Wouldn't that make life just so much easier? And in some ways, in a temporary sense of the word, it will, because essentially you're erasing the whole problem. So of course, yes, it's an easier route. And when it comes to acceptance, brothers and sisters, towards this issue, though Islam doesn't allow for this, when you look at the verses of the Quran are quite clear about this issue. If this was an issue where the Quran was a bit vague on it, then we could have made such claims, or someone could have made such claims. But that's not the case with the verses of the Quran. Sometimes people see another Muslim being accepting towards this ideology. Immediately they start to attack that individual. How dare you? This is evil. Haven't you heard of the story of Lut? Okay, but did you sit down to ask this person why they came to this conclusion? What was their thought process? Why did they assume that this should be allowed in our faith? This is important. We have to engage in dialogue. And many times when people don't engage in dialogue, it is because of an insecurity of knowing that if they were to engage in dialogue, there might be questions that might be brought up that they don't have the answers to. So the easier response is what? The story of Lut, that's it, don't talk to me. This is easier than to engage in dialogue. No, this person who is accepting towards this lifestyle, at least a Muslim, is not necessarily a bad person, an evil person. Sometimes it has other reasons. I will mention two of them. It may not always be these two. It might be some other things, but at least two of them. And I know this because I've engaged in conversation with individuals who used to believe such a thing. The first of these reasons is that this person fundamentally believes that your religiosity and your spirituality has nothing to do with what you decide to do in your own home. Does that ring a bell from the topic we discussed on Islamic spirituality and modern spirituality? This person's definition of spirituality is how you treat people, what kind of a citizen you are to people, how kind you are to them, the acts of kindness you do in society. And these are all, by the way, part of Islam. There's no doubt about it, except we mentioned in that talk that this is not the only thing that Islam preaches. Islam is also looking for submission. So this person's approach is, listen, if this person decides to be a part of this type of relationship or a heterosexual relationship, it's not going to change fundamentally how they act within society. So now in the private rooms of their home and so on, whatever they do, what does that have to do with religion? What does that have to do with God? They're not being unfair to anybody. They're not hurting anybody. They're not being unkind to anybody. This is the thought process. Except, again, this doesn't mesh with what Islam teaches us, because Islam never said that your spirituality and religiosity is only about how you do things within the greater society. No. Islam says when you go home, you have to pray. When you pray, what impact does it have on society? Maybe no impact at all. But Islam says if you don't pray, you are close to kufr, as many narrations say. The one who fundamentally doesn't pray, not the one who might miss every now and then, but the one who fundamentally tarikus salat. Fundamentally, multiple narrations talk about. We'll talk more about this on the 10th night. Okay, so what impact am I having on society if I don't pray? Maybe no impact at all. But that's not how religion works. Religion is looking for submission and is working on that ego of yours that you have, whether you're in society or you're in your home. But however, this person's understanding is what? Well, this person's not hurting anyone. And in some ways, maybe that's true, maybe it's not. That's a longer discussion. Okay, so this is number one, but it doesn't mesh with what Islam teaches. This is number one. A second reason why sometimes people are accepting towards these lifestyles is coming from a place of sympathy. It's actually a very innocent approach. It's not necessarily always evil, agenda this, so on and so forth. What I'm talking about right now is not this corporation or that corporation. It's not what we're talking about. We're talking about community members right now, brothers and sisters. This person looks at a friend who is struggling with such attractions. Okay, but they see this person's life is difficult. Of course it's difficult. We're going to talk about it, how difficult it is. And in order to make sense of this in their own mind, and in order to be able to find a solution to this problem, what will they do? They will say, you know what, actually, I don't think God would put someone through the difficulty that this person is going through. Hence, it must be the case that Islam, Arhamur Rahimin, the God who is the most merciful, shouldn't have a problem with this. Look at the difficulty it's creating for him because this is forbidden in our religion. It's coming a lot of times from a place of sympathy. But Islam also doesn't agree with this form of sympathy, because as we will discuss, there are two forms of sympathy, or empathy, I should say. There's that form of empathy where you erase the problem altogether. There's a place of empathy where you don't erase the problem, but you understand the struggle of the person that you are dealing with. The latter is what Islam really emphasizes. The former, Islam does not necessarily agree with. And we will talk about this more. This is the second approach that you will find. The third approach that you will find is the approach of an individual who essentially objects to these lifestyles, but does it in such a harsh, rude, disrespectful way that he doesn't even take the time to understand the difficulty of this community member who is experiencing such attractions. Harsh objection. So when you talk to this guy, the whole discussion is a minute and a half. He says, listen, haven't you heard about the story of Prophet Lut? Yeah, I heard about the story of Prophet. That's it. It's haram. You're going to burn in hell. Don't talk to me. This harsh objection. Did this person put things into the proper Islamic framework? No, this is not the proper Islamic framework with regards to. So you might say, well, what is it that Islam, therefore, out of these four different approaches or three approaches, is expecting of you and I? When it comes to Islam, brothers and sisters, there are two main elements to the Islamic approach as far as I understand this topic. This is just my humble opinion. The first of those is yes, the element of non-acceptance. There's no doubt that Islam is not accepting of acting upon such desires. There's no doubt about it. We mentioned this at the beginning of the talk as well. When you look at the verses of the Quran, they are very clear on this. There have been attempts, whether you're talking about Islam or even other faiths. In Christianity, there's also been attempts of this sort, to look at the stories mentioned in the Quran and in the Bible and to interpret them in a different sense, to denote that the problem that Prophet Lut had with his people was not the issue of acting upon this attraction between the same gender. The problem was a lack of consent in these relationships. This attempt has been made many times to interpret the verses of the Quran in this way, to interpret even the Bible in this way. Now with the Bible, it's slightly different. With the Quran, when you look at the verses of the Quran has set the wording in such a way, the wording of the Quran cannot even be interpreted in this way. Why? Because Lut alayhi salam, in multiple surahs of the Quran, what does he tell people? He says, أَإِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الرِّجَالَ شَهْوَةً مِّن دُونِ النِّسَاءِ. Do you guys approach men and not women? If the problem was consent, would he be pointing out the men and not the women? So now Islam is saying, or this prophet of God is saying, approaching women without consent is okay. It's only a problem when you approach a male. This doesn't mesh with any principle of the Quran. So then the problem was not the consent. This is the first point to remember. There are those who will come back to you and say, well, I want to make a point clear to you. There have always been people who have struggled with this attraction. Absolutely, there's no doubt about it. The same way there's always been people who have struggled with an attraction to consuming alcohol, for example, to interacting with the opposite gender outside of a marriage, for example, and the list goes on and on. In fact, the very fact that the Quran says this deed is forbidden, doesn't that mean that this is something that some people engage in? Does the Quran ever sit there and say, listen, when you go to Pluto, don't eat of any of the plants or the dirt that you find there? No, because you're never going to end up in Pluto. When the Quran says this is forbidden, what does that mean? That means you're going to come across this. This is a thing. Otherwise, what's the purpose of forbidding it? Does the Quran ever say when you run into that alien, it's wajib for you to say salam to him? No, because you're never going to run into the alien. Or would we? We don't know. The reality is the Quran has made this forbidden. That means, yes, there's always been this throughout history. There's no doubt about that. Okay, moving on. The next question that comes to mind when you say Islam is non-accepting towards this is that this person will say, but how can Islam fundamentally go against the foundational identity of this person? This person wants to be authentic in terms of who they are. These are the feelings and emotions that they have. How could God expect this person to go against his own identity? And Islam will respond to you that this is not his most foundational identity. His most foundational identity is servitude to his Creator. This is not his most foundational identity. If I came to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and said, I'm American, this is my identity. So whatever it implies, I'm going to act on it. We talked about this on night 1 and night 2. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell you in some ways you can act on it, but if it goes against my religion and your servitude, we say no to that. Similarly, someone wants to build an identity around their sexual preference, but if it's going to go against their most foundational identity, well then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not accepting of this. The same way you might have hundreds of other identities that you're very proud of, but the moment they go against the faith, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, no, you can't act on this identity here. Your ethnicity, your family, so on and so forth. And hence you find something very, very interesting in the verses of the Quran. That the Quran, when it comes to the people of Lut, never refers to the people of Lut as a person who is homosexual, who is gay or lesbian or so on and so forth. Never refers to such individuals in terms of an identity. Refers to them in terms of the acts that they engage in. What does the Quran say? أَإِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الرِّجَالِ. Do you approach men? Is this something you do, not something you are? How could the Quran go against this person's identity? The Quran doesn't believe this is this person's most foundational identity. Someone might be hearing this and is not Muslim or doesn't look at the verses of the Quran. Yes, it's not going to make sense to you if you're not looking at it from an Islamic, angle. There's no doubt about that. This, we're looking at it from an Islamic angle. Okay, this is the non-acceptance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. But then there is a second element. And this second one, brothers and sisters, gets lost. When you have someone who is struggling with such a thing, you're not only responsible to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to explain that acting on these desires is not acceptable in Islam. It's considered to be a sin. The second responsibility that you have is empathy. Empathy, kindness, compassion. Kindness and compassion, the moment you say that, people say, oh, so we have to be accepting. No, who told you that? Who told you being empathetic and kind and compassionate towards a person who is struggling with something in their life means you accept what they're going through? So let me explain a little bit, brothers and sisters. When you have an individual who's struggling, just understand where this person is coming from. This is a person who's struggling in a multitude of different ways in life. From a young age, this is normally the experience that you will hear. From a young age, this person feels different. So already, it's difficult to fit in. As they hit puberty and come to, an age older than that, then all of a sudden things are much more different. Now, isolation becomes a thing. Then beyond that, of course, if you're dealing with such things, what is the next result of this? Well, your marital situation is potentially going to be impacted by it. So that's an added layer of pressure. Then the chit-chats and the sarcasm that people have about you behind your back is an extra layer of pressure. Then sometimes you'll see parents disowning their children. Now I ask you, if you approach this person without empathy, someone who's already going through all these difficulties, all this pressure is already on him, is he more likely to stick to his faith and say, I'm going to work my way through this desire of mine? Or is he more likely to say, you know what, I'm done with this, I don't even belong here, I'm out? Which one is more likely? When the angels came to Ibrahim, they were on their way to the people of Lut, they stopped on the way at the house of Ibrahim. When things settled down, they told Ibrahim, they said, Ibrahim, we're going to the people of Lut. God's punishment is coming. Look at the empathy that Ibrahim showed, the compassion that Ibrahim showed. Ibrahim, for a moment, he said, maybe the punishment is not for sure yet. So what did he do? This is the verses of the Quran. يُجَادِلُنَا فِي قَوْمِ لُوتٍ. He immediately said, wait a second, let's see if we can do something about it. Can I do their shafa'ah? Can we hold back? Can we give them more time? Can we do this? That is the empathy that a prophet of God had. That's why Ibrahim is Ibrahim. Ibrahim is not Ibrahim because he sits there and says, yeah, you're going to burn in hell. Go, I don't want to talk to you. That's not Ibrahim. Ibrahim is the one, he makes the red lines of his faith clear, but at the same time, he has this empathy that you and I can't even imagine. Imagine a people who have a living, breathing prophet amongst them, Lut, and they're still disobeying, and Ibrahim still comes back and tells the angels, wait a moment, is there anything I can do? Ya Ibrahimu a'rid an hada. Ibrahim, it's a done deal, this one. There's no more room. Then he submits to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Empathy, brothers and sisters. This is very, very crucial. Okay, so if I bring together these two elements, it seems to put together the approach that Islam wants from me. But here's the thing, brothers and sisters. This is when you're dealing with someone within your own community, a brother, a sister, whatever the case, who might be struggling with this, still identifies as Muslim, wants to practice their faith, so on and so forth. Sometimes this is not the case anymore. Sometimes you're dealing with corporations, and sometimes children are involved. Well, a corporation, I don't know if you've noticed, but a corporation usually understands things through their bottom line. That's pretty much the only thing that matters for any corporation. That's what a corporation is for. It's there to produce money, and fundamentally, even more so within a capitalistic society. Bottom line. Corporations don't care about your values. Corporations also don't necessarily care about your family, your children, so on and so forth. They care about their bottom line. You want to speak to a corporation? That's how you speak to them. That's how you let them know whether you approve of something they're doing or not. And it's completely within your rights, and there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes children get involved, and this is where sometimes you find parents who are extremely naive. So what will this parent say? This parent will say, Sheikh, I understand these things are not allowed. We want to keep some distance from these things. But here's the thing, Sheikh. My children are going to be exposed to this stuff anyways. They're living in this society. They're going to be exposed to this stuff anyways. So now why this headache? Don't expose them now. He's going to find out about this stuff anyways. What this parent is forgetting about is that your child is going through formative years. His character is just getting built right now. Yes, your child and you yourself will be exposed to certain things in 20 years that you never imagined was even a thing. Even you will be exposed to new things as you go on through life. But these are formative years of this child. The world of this child is being built right now. You need to safeguard that. You need to protect that. Whatever the law allows you within the boundaries of the law, this is your role. That's why you're the father. That's why you're the mother. To protect your children. This is the role that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put on your shoulder and on our shoulder. And I want to go a step further here, brothers and sisters. Here's the reality of the matter. A lot of times parents who are even concerned about these issues and want to safeguard their children take the most temporary approach that you can possibly take. The most short-term approach that you can possibly take. Oh, as long as this book is not there. As long as, this TV... Here's the thing, brothers and sisters. As long as we are putting the education of our children in the hands of anybody else, who sometimes might even mean well, but doesn't have the values that you and I have, as long as this is the case, this is the situation we're dealing with. You're a parent, you're concerned, here's what you need to do. You need to take control of the education of your child. I promise you, come to any parents, and tell them, listen, 10 minutes a day, why don't you bring your children and have them sit with this stranger? The stranger is going to have a conversation with them. Tell me any parent who would do that. They'll immediately say, no, what do you mean? Of course not, it's a stranger. But then they'll hand them this device. Strangers will have conversations with their child 8 hours a day. And at the end, the parent will walk away and say, but his knees aren't bruised and he doesn't have any scars on him. He must be fine. No, this is your role to safeguard your children. Wherever we are, brothers and sisters, in our communities, in terms of education and educational services that we offer, we have to take it up to the next notch. As long as you're outsourcing this to someone who doesn't look at things the way you're looking at things, of course that person is going to do it the way they want to do it. This is how it is. Today, it's this issue. Tomorrow, it's going to be liberalism. The next day, it's going to be feminism. The next day, it's going to be atheism. The next day, it's going to be gender roles. The next day, it's going to be this. The next day, it's going to be that. You're handing off your children to somebody else. Why? There are communities, still when they invite speakers, They're not worried about which topics, what issues, what are those issues we have to, how can I educate our younger generation? Well, this needs to change. There are some communities, they have weekend Islamic schools, except it's such poor quality. The kid walks away hating Islam more than loving Islam. This needs to be elevated. There are some communities, they're in better shape than this. They have summer camps, they have retreats. We need more of that. Wherever you are on that scale of providing educational services to your community, that needs to go up a notch. There are some communities that easily have the ability to have their own high quality Islamic schools. High quality. But that's not a priority. Well, if it's not a priority, brothers and sisters, then know that as parents, we're handing off our children. Things are being taught to them. Today might be this issue. People think this is the issue. Listen, society has always been diverging away from faith. When was the last time you spoke to someone from the elders and they said, yes, mashallah, society is so much better today. Society is always heading its own direction. This is your responsibility to take control of the education of your children, to be involved in the education of your children, to know what's happening, to see if I can put him in a much better atmosphere than having to put him in an atmosphere where he's taught the wrong thing 24/7, except this one book is not available to him. This is not bad. This is good. But a lot more is needed for us, is what I'm trying to say. Yes? A lot more. We need to take a much more long-term approach to this issue. Otherwise, these issues, brothers and sisters, will always pop up. This is not the first time. Didn't we have issues with our kids in schools before this issue came up? Wasn't sex ed always an issue of my child being exposed to a heterosexual relationship, but at a young age? Isn't that an issue in Islam as well? These are things that will always be there because society is headed in a different direction. You're sitting here and saying, I have a prophet in the word of God and he told me to live my life a completely different way. Of course, these two are going to be different from one another. Now, someone might say, well, what am I supposed to do if I am in a situation, or I know a friend who might be in a situation who is struggling with such attractions? And with this, inshallah, we'll wrap up. Number one, first and foremost, understand that you are to look for resources from other peers who have had experiences of this sort, who can guide you through this path of maneuvering such desires. One podcast I want to introduce is a podcast called A Way Beyond the Rainbow, something to look into as a resource. That itself consists of many other resources as well. Number one. Number two, understand this does not mean in any shape or way that God hates you, dislikes you. This is punishment for something you did when you were 5 years old, where you couldn't even sin even if you wanted to. This is not a punishment from God. This is a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's number two. Number three, understand that the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is greater when the test that He has put in your life is greater than the tests of others. Number four, understand the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is greater when you fall short at a test that is much, much greater than the test of other individuals. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might turn to me and tell me to wake up for Fajr. I might struggle to do so. I might fall short sometimes. And yet we say the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there for this person. Isn't this what we say? Okay, now this test has been placed in the life of this person. It's fundamentally changing his whole future. You're saying God's mercy is not there? As long as this person is trying to hold back, try. That you can do. You might say, well, the emotions, the feelings, they're not voluntary. Okay, but acting on them, at least you can try. I might fall short. Well, guess what? We fall short on a lot of different things. And the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there to catch us when we fall short. This is number four. Number five, and final point. If the emotions are not voluntary, and even if acting on them, sometimes we might say, we might fall short, so on and so forth. But the one thing that is definitely voluntary and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects us to refrain from is being open and public and promoting such a lifestyle. This one's voluntary. And sometimes in narrations you read, when someone, just because they weren't public about something, they were that much closer to the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In fact, when you look in the verses of the Quran, this story of Lut that we talk about all the time, yes? The story of Lut, this happened, that happened. All of this story that we talk about, there is one important detail that almost everyone misses when it comes to the story of Lut. The punishment that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent on the people of Lut in that particular way that the Quran talks about. Was it just because they engaged in the sin, or was there an added factor? There was an added factor. They engaged in that sin, and then Lut complains of his people. He says, وَتَأْتُونَ فِي نَادِيكُمُ الْمُنْكَرِ. You all engage in the sin publicly. Let me have at least that much submission, that if I'm struggling with something like this, it's between me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ذَلِكَ وَمَنْ يُعَذِّمْ حُرُمَاتِ اللَّهِ. The one who gives respect to the red lines of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَهُ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِ. God is going to look out for that person. This is voluntary. At the very least, I can do this. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that on this issue, as well as other issues, that He grants us as a community the knowledge and the intelligence to know how we are supposed to react and respond at the first level. And beyond that, to help us be able to do so on a practical level. With that, inshallah, we'll bring tonight's talk to an end. Let us take a moment to recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all of our marhumin and marhumat with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.
Please recite another salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Before we begin the majlis, we would like to make a few announcements. So the second Q&A session will be this Thursday, 6:30 p.m. in this hall. Regarding the Taha Foundation Community Center and the Ashura project in general, the support is still needed. Donation boxes, you can find them outside for either cause. Your support is really needed. You can either donate through the donation boxes or online. And final reminder is that the English Maqta will be on Friday, 8 p.m. with Brother Hassan Bazdoon. There will be no lecture during that night. So the last lecture for Sheikh Mahdi will be on the 10th night. Please recite a salawat. If Rasulullah was in Karbala, the Prophet, would they have fought? Or Ashura today, would they commemorate? Did they not see that young man who was closest out of all to his beauty and manners? That when the family would miss the Prophet, to his face they would look. Did they not see him when their swords were drawn? And his name, he reminds, أنا علي بن الحسين بن علي نحن وبيت الله أولى بالنبي. The words that make a father proud, affirming his message bravely. Are we not on the right path? Then difficulties, not one there is. If death it is, for this religion let it be. This stance today gives us all we need to be followers of truth and enemies of the devil. With one triumph after another, all we possess indeed is from Ashura. All we possess indeed is from Ashura. To the tragedy of Ali al-Akbar, with Brother Hassan Bazdoon, let us welcome him with 3 loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
وصل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله، وعلى آلك المظلومين. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي يا أبا عبد الله، وعلى ابنك علي الأكبر شبيه رسول الله. يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة. May the peace of Allah be upon you, Aba Abdullah, and upon your son Ali al-Akbar, killed with you in Karbala, Mazloom, Ya Hussein, Gharib, Ya Hussein, Shaheed, Ya Hussein. Together, let's say the Zahra here. A stranger you were in Karbala, Ya. Thirsty you were in Karbala, Ya. Martyred you fell in Karbala, Ya. Young and brave, young and brave, handsome like the moon. His life he gave, left his dad so soon. His hand he waved, then took his spear, and into battle sailed without any fear. Then soon he fell, and Hussein rushed near. He saw his son torn by sword and spear, and a smile bloomed. Then came a tear from Ali al-Akbar right before he died. Father Hussein, I'm with them here. With who, ya Ali? With Rasulullah and the noble family. Ali al-Akbar, gone so soon. Hussein saddened in Karbala's dunes. Ali, my son, where have you gone? In the words attributed to Al-Imam al-Mahdi in Ziyarat al-Nahiya, he says, Assalamu alayka ya awwala qatil wa ya nasla khayri salil. In addressing Ali al-Akbar, peace be upon you, O first of martyrs, from the most blessed of progeny. One of the Hashimiyin who was with Imam Hussein alayhi salam in Karbala was his brave son Ali al-Akbar, who was near his 20s. Al-Akbar was beloved to Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and he resembled Rasulullah in his features. And the Imam would often say, if we long to look at the face of Rasulullah, we would look at the face of Ali al-Akbar. And Ali was a young, faithful, brave, strong man who was always in the service of his father and his mother and his parents. And though young, Ali was full of wisdom and knowledge, and he knew where righteousness was. He knew what was haqq and what was batil. And he was learned and wise enough to know what his responsibility was. And a narration says that as the caravan of Imam Hussein alayhi salam was making its way in the desert towards Kufa, Imam Hussein alayhi salam fell asleep while sitting on his horse for a brief moment. And then he wakes up and he says, Alhamdulillah, la ilaha illallah, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. And Ali al-Akbar hears him. He says, Father, why are you reciting this tasbih? Because it was kind of like a startled moment. And Imam Hussein alayhi salam says, when I closed my eyes, I saw a rider saying, Al-qawmu yasirun wal-manaya tasiru khalfahum. I saw a rider chanting, the caravan travels and their death travels behind them. There Ali al-Akbar looked at his father and he said, may Allah shield you from all harm. Are we not with haqq? Are we not with truth? And Imam Hussein said, indeed we are. And Ali said, then we are indifferent whether death falls upon us or we fall upon death. Yes, and we go to the 10th of Muharram. The Ashab insisted that they fight before the family, the men in the family of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And after the battle began and the companions were killed, a silence overcame the camp of Imam Hussein. Now it was time for Bani Hashim to fight. It was their turn for Mubaraza. When that time came, Ali al-Akbar, being the son of Imam Hussein, knew what his responsibility was. He understood his father's mission, and he was not hesitant to do what's right. Ali al-Akbar found it befitting that he should be the first fighter from the Hashimiyin to die in defense of his father. Yes, he stepped forward, confident, strong, determined. And he approached Imam Hussein and asked his permission and his blessing to be the first warrior from Bani Hashim to shed his blood in Karbala. Imagine the scene. When Imam Hussein alayhi salam saw his son standing in front of him ready for war, asking for his permission to enter the battlefield, the Imam, how did he feel? I appeal to the parents in the crowd. From the age of infancy, parents fall in love with their children and fathers with their sons, and they raise them and they care for them and they're worried about them, and they cannot wait for the moment to see them handsome and grown and strong and independent, and they fear from the slightest thing that might harm their kids, and they long for that moment where the young boy becomes a man. But this is Imam Hussein alayhi salam looking at his youthful son. Imagine the feeling. And his son is ready to go and fight, and the Imam knows this is the final fight. The Imam, the narration says, he could not verbalize his permission to Ali al-Akbar, so instead his eyes became teary. يعني الدموع ملأت عيناه. And he raised his hands towards the sky and he said, اللهم اشهد على هؤلاء القوم فقد برز إليهم غلام أشبه الناس خلقا وخلقا بنبيك. Ya Allah, bear witness upon these people, for a young man has come forward to them, a young man who who resembles your messenger in his appearance, in his morals, and in his speech. And whenever we longed for your messenger, we would look at his face. When Ali al-Akbar heard this from his father, he knew that he was given permission. Before he entered the battlefield, he went to his mother and his sisters and his aunt Zainab to bid them his final farewell. Then Ali got on the horse, took his sword, and entered the battlefield. As he charged towards the enemies, Imam Hussein alayhi salam sees his son riding into the battlefield. He calls out to Umar ibn Sa'd, Ya Umar, qata Allahu rahimak kama qata'ta rahimi. Hey Umar, may Allah sever your lineage as you are severing mine. The land, the sand began to tremble with the forward of Ali, men began to crumble. Beasts, they appeared from far away, but sheep when Ali arrived and began to slay. Ali al-Akbar charged the enemies. What was he saying? Ana Ali ibn al-Husayn ibn Ali. I am Ali, the son of Hussein, the son of Ali. From the son of Ali, يعني from Hussein, from the son of Ali came Ali, wielding his sword ever so bravely, chanting praise of his father loudly. I am Ali, son of Hussein, son of Ali. Hear me roar, fear my fury. My sword today scribes for history. That in Karbala I fought, that in Karbala I fought fiercely to defend Hussein and the daughters of Ali. Ali al-Akbar fought bravely, killing many opponents who came to duel against him. When Umar ibn Sa'd saw his might, he sent forward a vicious warrior named Bakr ibn Ghanim to fight Ali al-Akbar. Now Imam Hussein alayhi salam was in between the battlefield and the tents, and he's watching his son. So when he saw that Ghanim came to fight Ali al-Akbar, the features on his face changed. Layla, the mother of Ali al-Akbar, she sees this. She notices that the Imam looks worried. She says, Aba Abdullah, has harm come to my son? Is it the time for sorrow? He says, no, but a fighter has come to him that I'm afraid for him from. Ya Layla, pray to Allah, pray for your son, for I have heard that the dua of a mother is always accepted for her children. Layla goes into the tent, she raises her hand, إلهي بغربة أبي عبد الله يا راد يوسف إلى يعقوب, bring him to me, my Lord, once more, lest I forget his charming face after this war. Bring him to me, my Lord, once more, to embrace him again before his soul soars. And with the dua of his mother, Ali al-Akbar was able to defeat Bakr ibn Ghanim in the battle. And then he returned to the camp of Imam Hussein, to his father. But he was exhausted from the thirst. He says, Father Hussein, is there any drop of water I can drink? How must that statement how did it weigh on the heart of Imam Hussein alayhi salam? He says, Father, a thirst is killing me, and the weight of the armor is exhausting me. Is there not a sip of water so I may drink? The Imam says, what does he say? He says, Ya Ali, I have no water. I have no water. Son Ali, fight a bit longer and soon you will meet your grandfather Muhammad, who will quench your thirst from his cup, after which you will never be thirsty again. But before returning to the battlefield, the narrations say that he went to his mother one last time. He found her unconscious, so he gently embraces her. And when she felt his presence, Waladi Ali, Waladi Ali, you must depart, that I know. And her heart is speaking to Ali al-Akbar. You must depart, that I know. Your handsome face will lose its glow. Over you my tears forever will flow, and my heart shall ever be hollow. How can a mother in Karbala fare? My grief for you mountains cannot bear. But don't hesitate, my son, though I weep. Defend your father and your life do spare. Ali al-Akbar entered the battlefield for the second time and continued fighting valiantly. But he has now grown too exhausted. And one of the enemies notices this and he says, I am going to shatter the heart of his mother. Then he charges towards Ali al-Akbar and he digs his spear and Ali's back. Yes, when Ali al-Akbar was stabbed in the back, he leaned forward on the horse and his body covered the horse's eyes. So the horse trotted towards the enemy's side and they showed no mercy to Ali al-Akbar, this brave wounded warrior. Instead, many attacked him from all sides with arrows, swords and spears, until he fell to the ground calling, Alayka minni salam, Aba ya Hussein. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, along with whoever was with him from Bani Hashim, rushed to his son Ali al-Akbar. He cleared the enemies. How does the Imam find his boy? He found him torn from limb to limb, wounded in every part of his body. Yes, a narration says that there was a trace of life in Ali al-Akbar when the Imam found him. The Imam embraced his son. He placed his cheek over his cheek and he says, Bunay Ali, qatal Allahu qawman qataluk. My son Ali, may Allah kill those who killed you. How audacious are they against Allah and the sanctity of His Messenger. على الدنيا بعدك العفا. Tears are flowing from his eyes and he continues to say, Son Ali, after your loss, what's this life even worth? You're leaving the calamities of this dunya, and you're leaving your father in these calamities. With a final breath, Ali al-Akbar, he looks at his father's Hussein and he whispers, this is my grandfather Muhammad, quenching my thirst with the water that you promised me. Ya Hussein, I will never be thirsty again. And he says, hurry, for your water awaits you. Then as the Imam held his son, he took his final breath. رحم الله من نادى وعليا وعليا وسيدا. The narrations say that Imam Hussein alayhi salam requested a tarp so the Manba of Bani Hashim can carry the body of Ali al-Akbar to the camp. When they brought the body back to the camp, Zainab rushes to console her brother Hussein, as if his heart says, Ali ra, Ali ra, يا زينب قومي سنديني علي راح. Ali's gone, Ali's gone. Dear Zainab, come help me. Ali's gone. So let's in haste hide his body. Why, Abu Abdullah? Why do you want to hide the body of Ali al-Akbar? I fear that if his mom would see, she'll weep until death and agony. Her son is torn by swords and spears. Her eyes will not stop bleeding tears. Ali's gone. Dear Zainab, come help me. My son has gone, so young in years. I watched him grow to me so dear, and now I stand helpless near my son's body in this land here. Ya Karbala, brutal is your pain. Ya Karbala, you broke the heart of Hussein. Ya Karbala, have mercy upon the heart of Hussein. Ya Allah, we ask and call upon you by your greatest name, the mightiest, the most honorable, to send your blessings and praise upon Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, and that you accept of us our worship. We ask that you send your mercy upon the dead of the believing men and women. Whoever was in this gathering of ours and has a need, that you fulfill it for them, in particular those who have requested that we do dua on their behalf. We ask you, whoever in this gathering of ours and is sick and has a family member, that you heal them and cure their ailments. We pray that you relieve the suffering of all those oppressed, and that you hasten the return of our beloved 12th Imam, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajah. We ask that you protect our scholars and Maraja and protect the Muslim Ummah against evildoers conspiring against them. May the peace of Allah be upon the noble Hussein, the children of Hussein, the family of Hussein, and the companions of Hussein. May the peace of Allah be upon Ali al-Akbar, the son of Hussein, upon the noble Abbas and the honorable Zainab. Assalamu ala al-Hussein. Assalamu ala al-Hussein wa ala Ali ibn al-Hussein. وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام على أبي الفضل العباس يا أخي الحسين. السلام على الحوراء زينب أخت الحسين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصل يا رب على محمد وآله الطاهرين وعلى أرواح الشهداء والعلماء ومن مات على ولاية مولانا علي بن أبي طالب وإلى أرواح أموات الحاضرين معنا لا سيما القائمين على هذا المجلس. رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة مسبوقة بالصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.
Ten years ago, we embarked on a mission to revive the true values of Islam within our community. Empowered by the faith and dedication of our volunteers and your endless support, our projects impacted the lives of tens of thousands in our community and beyond. Since day one, our effort was recognized as one being led by the youth, and the youth have always been at the center of our focus. Our goal was and remains to instill Islamic values that enlighten the young generation, strengthen their identity, and empower them to become successful leaders in the future. But as the times we are in become more challenging every day, and our values are consistently under attack, we cannot stand still, and having a facility that allows for bigger and better projects became a necessity. Alhamdulillah, today, Taha Foundation, the parent organization of the Ashura project, and Al-Mustafa Scouts is pleased, honored, and excited to announce the next milestone in our journey. As of May 5th, we have completed the purchase of the upcoming Taha Foundation Community Center, a 48,000 square foot facility that has the amenities we need to improve and expand our programs, including a lecture hall, classrooms, a gym, and a spacious outdoor gathering area. While we are able to secure the purchase of this building, a lot of work is still required to transform it into the state-of-the-art facility that serves our needs in the most effective and efficient way possible. Today, more than ever, and for the sake of our kids and families, we're asking for your support in raising the funds needed for this project. Our fundraising target is $580,000 that will go towards renovations, repairs, furniture, and equipment. Your contribution, no matter how small, will make a significant difference. Join us as we embark on the next stage of our journey. With Allah's guidance and your support, we can empower the next generation of leaders and build a better future for our youth. Donate today.